Hello, everyone. This is Maya with Trials with Maya C, and today I have a very insightful um, podcast guest, Ritesh Patel from Fin Partners. When I heard first about Fin Partners, I knew it's about um, a lot of expertise and consulting. But one thing that really excited me about Fin Partners is um, the fact that Fin Partners comes with a lot of expertise in digital health and clinical trials, digitalization in general in clinical trials. But one thing that really excites me is that they achieve that through partnerships. I rarely start with such an advertisement and not like taking anything for that. But why I start with that before giving the word to Ritesh is because um, all of my guests have been saying how collaboration is important for our industry to actually bring our industry to a better place. And I'm very happy to see someone actually doing that. Ritesh, welcome to my podcast. Thank you for taking the time. We'll speak primarily about real world data and standard of care today. You have some awesome stories to tell. But before we dive into the conversation, please introduce yourself briefly.
Certainly. First of all, thanks, Maya, for including me in this. I'm honored and privileged, so appreciate that. I work at Fin Partners in the digital health practice, and basically what that means is anything regarding how do we use these new tools, technologies, platforms, capabilities, uh, and increasingly, the new things that are coming out, evaluate them, make sure that they work and do the things they do, and then promote them to our clients as a way of engaging their customers. So I've been doing this for many years to the point where my motto is, if it moves, digitize it. So anytime I can figure out a way to digitize something, that's what I work on.
Interesting. Now, I wanted to start like directly with the story about how you actually built more or less the first global standard of care solution. But before that, you mentioned something. Everything that moves and can be digitalized, let's do that. Actually, have you been in this situation where people said, and maybe can you give us an exact example? I'm just wondering, people said that will never be digitalized. That's insane to digitalize this. And then again, you found a partner or you did it to make it happen.
Well, I mean, I got into this crazy healthcare industry in 2010. Before that, I was minding my own business, working at a company called Cushman and Wakefield, which was a commercial real estate organization.
Hmm.
And there I was responsible for, I worked in IT, and I was responsible for rolling out a global CRM solution for commercial real estate brokers. So if you know that market, real estate brokers are very, very particular about protecting their deals. And CRM goes exactly the opposite of what they want to do, because CRM, you want the deal in one place for everybody to see it so that you can manage the customer. So that's where I, really cut my teeth in the 4 years of doing that, of how do you help the person and make sure they get what they want, but do the thing that the technology needs to do to make it better for the organization. I used to call it the schizophrenic CRM, because it was one of those where we did allow the brokers to keep information about their deal secret. But once the deal was done, everybody got paid, then we put it into the CRM. So that was sort of the result I came out with to help both parties. So in healthcare, when I joined a company called Inventive. We were a CRO. One of the largest at the time, actually, or the third largest, or something like that. Behind at that time, I think it was um, yeah, I don't think even they were called IQVIA. They were called something else, and Parexel and PPD and ourselves. And I noticed we were faxing things everywhere. And there was this thing called SharePoint that could put everything together in one place. So, how do you convince somebody that who firmly in their heart of hearts believed the fax was the most secure thing they can use to send clinical trial data from a PI to the CRO? And you had to convince them that actually SharePoint and online and uploading it was as secure.
Mm.
and faster and cheaper and put it all in one place for everybody. So we did that, but it was really tough, really, really interesting to go to individual PIs, talk to even the CRO project managers and say, hey guys, there's a better way to do this by digitizing it. But it
Mm.
happened. It takes a while. So I think that's an example of how taking a manual process and putting it into digital. There are many others that we can go through. All of it is consistent in two things. What's in it for me? Always have to figure that out, right? What's in it for me? And then secondly is how easy is it? The more complex we make it, if you talk to engineers, you talk to somebody who made Excel, they'll tell you Microsoft Excel can do 70 million things that they've built features for. But the normal human being uses them for spreadsheets. That's it. You've got some sophisticated 10% of the user base that does data in it and does data crunching and financial models and all of those things. But 90% of the population that uses Excel uses maybe 20% of the features. Uh, they're the easy ones, right?
Very interesting. That reminds me of like these discussions. How much percentage of our brain do we actually use? It's like somewhat similar.
Exactly. Exactly.
Interesting. That's actually a
Exactly.
great transition to the story about how you started thinking about um, going from manual to more of automated way to gather standard of care information and real world data to be specific at global scale. And remind me, Ritesh, you were back then in Inventive again, right? That's
Yeah.
when you.
So exactly. At Inventive, we owned a number of companies. One of them was called Adherus, which was basically collecting data around clinical trials,
Mhm.
patients, claims data, all of that stuff. We also did a lot of work globally, right? So, how do we put all of that data in one place? And then, how do we figure out how do we use it in a way to help us do clinical trials better, right? What kinds of data do we need? So, not only did we have our own claims data that we had, but then we started to overlay it with other sets of data so that we can be more intelligent about both the patients that we have that were in the trials, but also things like feasibility, right? Can you use data to become better at feasibility studies?
Mm,
Because before you were just going to the usual suspect guys that you knew who could execute the trial
yeah.
or be good enough to sit in front of the FDA to present the data, right? But if we have all of the data about all of the places where, particularly academic centers, where there are patients that could meet the protocol, maybe there are PIs that you can train, or maybe convince a doctor to be a PI. So create a new model for feasibility studies so we can basically go and get more and expand the base on PIs as well. So putting it all together in one place globally, massive undertaking, and then using that data for specific use cases, clinical trial recruitment,
Mm.
identification of PIs, new feasibility study ways of engaging, those kinds of things. Is what we sort of digitized because it was all in paper formats all over the place or in people's heads, right? Which is what's
Yeah.
the case is normally. Yeah. Project managers or the feasibility study guys at the CRO knew it in their heads. It was just never put on in any place. So
That's a lot of like in many cases that's like one of the biggest problems that it's in someone's head, and then it's nowhere else and it's not scalable and it's just a lot of back and forth communication, which yes you can actually get the information, get the insights, but then all this back and forth is just burning out everyone and
yeah,
it's not the most optimal. I remember you also mentioned that you had to work with, let's say, the British government, like the British institutions, and not just Britain, but some other European countries outside of the States, um, and literally work a way out of find a way to actually understand better their healthcare systems and how they like what type of they have available and put that together. Like, tell me more about that.
yeah. So that wasn't an inventive. That was something as a project we were doing, basically for registries and creating a capability for a client to be able to create patient registries, uh, because it was really difficult for a rare disease. you had the advocacy group, but there was no way to figure out if patients would be willing to do trials, for example. So one of
Mm.
the areas we worked with was the NHS in the UK, where we were trying to figure out, is there a model we can use to get patient registered, look at the data that they have, and then figure out a way to create a place for patients to have access to that data afterwards, right? The three-step approach. Where is it today? Create the registry and then give patients access to it. We worked with a number of partners there in trying to get that done. One of them, which is still going, was a company called Patients Know Best, which is run by
Mm.
this guy Mohammed in the UK. They're still going 10 years later, and they finally have got 5 or 6 NHS trusts to use their technology to give patients access to their actual record now. But
Oh
that
wow.
started as a germ of an idea of patient registries for clinical trials and what can we do to help get that going in a way that would be meaningful, both for the trust, protect the privacy of the data, but give the patient access to that information afterwards. A lot of advocacy groups have patient registries, but they keep them to themselves, right?
Mm.
They don't share them out so that people can use them. So um, lots of behavior change, lots of legal issues, lots of, I don't know, we want to give patients their data conversations. Um, we've done it, we did it in UK, then we tried to do it in Germany and we failed miserably. And it was only
Okay.
mainly regulatory, right? The
Ah.
GDPR had just come out. People really didn't want to, because they were unclear around the impact of GDPR on the project we were working on. Uh, and where would the data sit? Who would have access to it? Lots and lots of bureaucracy and conversations
Mm.
when you start getting government and regulatory people involved. So we had to abandon that project.
Well, I honestly, I was also thinking that regulatory is the biggest barrier because I understand it's a huge responsibility to get like all the records in one place and find a way to share them responsibly with third parties. It's also very important, but it was until 2 weeks ago where I actually found out the patient's perspective in a very concrete situation. I was speaking with a patient advocate, and I was actually asking her like, would you share this story? Because she has an amazing story that she went through in a clinical trial and basically having to travel to the States like for like multiple times a month even. It was an amazing story. And she said, you know what? I'm not confident sharing this story, and I'm not confident actually sharing in general like my health journey in general, just because right now I'm in the middle of searching for a job, and I feel that this will be kind of a minus
Hmm.
when I'm looking for a job. People knowing that I have a disease, it's a genetic disease. It doesn't prevent me from working, but like I don't know what will people will think. They're simply not aware. So there is this stigma, maybe also logical stigma, that once records are out there, people can use it for various things. And yes, on one side it will be this positive effect, which I really believe in, that will definitely accelerate medicine research and medicine. But on the other side, there are a lot of other cases where this can be used the opposite. Have you ever stumbled like across such dilemma? What about the patients? Will they see it as something positive or negative? And like besides the regulatory side of things.
I think, in what you've just said, the thread that is there is trust.
Mm,
Right? That's all it is.
true.
It's all about trust. I don't know if you remember about 3 or 4 years ago, NHS in the UK were going to
Yeah.
they publicly announced this registry. They were going to share it with DeepMind, the Google company.
Mm,
And there was a massive hue and cry in the UK. People
yeah.
with, spades and pitchforks were coming after the NHS about this. And the intent was the correct intent. How it was communicated and the whole thing about building trust into that thing was completely missed.
Mm,
And if it had come from a patient, if they'd gone to 30 patient advocacy groups to start with and said, look, we're going to do this, can you be our partners in this? We
mm,
will figure out the most methodical way to do it. We will give you patient advocacy groups access to it. We will strip out the PII, so we don't know it's Maya or Ritesh or whoever, but here's a pool of patients. All right. So that all of that process hadn't been thought through. It was just like, oh, we have this data. We should just share it. Right. You can't do that. And I think we miss the human piece of this. And as I said earlier, what's in it for me? Like, why would I give you my data? If there's a value exchange, if you say to me, if I suffer from a rare disease and there's only 20 of us, and you come to all 20 of us individually and you say, look, I'd love to do this. This is the reason I'm going to use this data. This is how it's going to work. This is who's going to have access to it. Your name is not going to be in it anywhere. It can't tie you to the data. And it's going to help somebody maybe develop a drug that will help you. I may think about participating. If you come
Hmm.
to me with, I'm going to take your data and I'm going to give it to someone because they're going to use it to build drugs, I'm going to say, what? Wait, hold on.
Yeah, I
Right?
agree.
That's the issue. And by the way, if you go outside of healthcare, look at financial services. We can't get a credit card without somebody who we have no idea who it is uses our data and our banking information and our credit information to decide whether they will give us a mortgage or not. And we're
Yeah.
perfectly fine with that.
Not only that, by the way, like I'll give you another simple example from the fintech world, like these budget management apps that you
Yeah.
have.
Yeah.
They need to connect to your
Your
banks so
bank.
that you can
Yeah.
exactly manage your expenses. So it's not. So there are various ways, and you're right. For some reason, in healthcare, we kind of lack communicating properly what's the win-win situation. That it is a win-win situation because imagine we have this pool of so much data, and we can actually speed up medicine like so quickly. Like it's the ideal world to me. Anyway, speaking about data, Ritesh, can you go back like a few steps back? Can we start with how do you define real-world data? What is real world data from your perspective?
Yeah, that's an interesting because everybody has a different view. My view is very simple. Real world data is data about some uh, in healthcare specifically. Real world data, real world evidence is about the lived experience of the patient, and then collecting that data of how they're managing the disease that they have, and creating a pool where you can then put that data in one place, so you can then do something with it, right? Whether that's create a program for managing their disease better, creating a capability where you can use the data for research, putting it together in a way that shows that if this patient were to do the following four things, their life would be different. All of those kinds of things. So, real world to me means it is based on individuals living their daily lives, or in clinical trials, it's been done in a way that is part of the use case and the workflow of the person, that you're not making them do something different. Because in a trial, we make them do something different, right? We enroll them, we bring them in, we tell them, we get them to consent, we get them assign a form, then we start putting this stuff together on administrating whatever it is. If it's an injectable, you've got to come in once a week, we'll inject you. Well, that's not real world because that's not how they work. They inject themselves in the morning, or sometimes they forget and it's 2 in the afternoon, and sometimes they forget it's in the evening. You know, all of those things have to come in place. So that's really what I think about as real world data and real
So
world evidence.
now that we have this definition, how accessible is real world data today?
Impossible.
Impossible? Okay.
Here's why. You're particularly in clinical, if we talk clinical, but I think you can do it differently as well. The only way I think you could do it is it's all sorts of data that's been put into one place. It's not one individual thing. In trials, we look at the data that we generate from the actual trial itself,
Hmm.
right? And we say that's real world because it's from a patient and we did this and this is what happened. And then here's the evidence to show that this product worked the way we designed it to work. And there you go, FDA, now do something, right? The reality is it's a small population base. It's not the 300 million people who live in America or the 10 million that suffer from this thing.
Yeah.
You've got massive societal issues. You've got, um, what's the word I'm looking for? Environmental issues that
Hmm.
they face, right? If you pick 10 patients from New York City in your trial, that's different to 10 patients from West Virginia from the middle of the mountains. right?
True. Yeah.
Diets are different, atmosphere is different, environment is different, your social determinants of health are different. So I think what you have to do is take the clinical data as the raw data to say, for this clinical trial, here's the real world data based on the patients that were in the trial. Now I'm going to overlay with a bunch of things that makes it real world, real world, the environmental piece, the social determinants of health piece, all of those things. That I think is what's missing.
I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, actually, the let's say in most cases, the definition of real world data that I hear today is more or less based on claims data, and some of them, like claims data, turn into electronic health records, which I think claims data is not equal to electronic health records. I think we can all agree here. But let's say that I was a little bit surprised when you say impossible, because I mean, don't get me wrong. I do understand that the electronic health record may just have the clinical journey of the patient, not the perception of the
It's the
patient.
closest, though. It's
But
the
it's the
closest.
close, exactly. So I was thinking, can we still, like, for example, real world data that's based on electronic health record, again, electronic health record, real electronic health record, not just claims data, would that be actually good enough for you to understand what's the patient journey, and how would that impact clinical trials, patient support groups? I'm sorry, yes, patient support
Yes, patient
programs.
support. Yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
I believe so. You'll never get to real world data, right? So I think
Yes.
it's the
Okay.
name that we have to change,
Mm,
right? So let's not call it real world data. Let's just call it patient data or patient journey data or something like that, right? Because that's reality of what we have access to at the moment until Bill Gates puts a chip in every one of us, it's going to be really difficult to collect all the data, right? So,
even
uh,
then, like, you don't know. I think I would go for Elon Musk and the Neuralink, because then they will
exactly.
know your thoughts.
So I think there are a couple of companies that are trying to crack this code. You've got here in the US, you've got, I think the guys who are close to it have done pretty well on it, actually. For
Hmm.
clinical, are the guys at CareSet in Houston, Texas. They have access to Medicare and Medicaid data, and
Hmm.
they've been doing exactly what you're suggesting, which is, here is that journey based on all of the data we see, right? Ritesh started on this medication on January the 3rd. That was his first line. He's suffering from this. Then he went to this second line because the first line didn't work. The doctor prescribed this. So what they're doing is they're taking that claims data and creating the journeys,
Hmm. That's
creating them. The
yeah.
claims data guys just collect the data, right? They put it in one place for you to do something with. Komodo's trying to do the same thing from a commercial perspective, right? How many doctors, have these kinds of patients? You have to manually then get either clinicians or experts in patient journeys to take that data and then map it out in the way you want it to for, say, a clinical trial, right? So CareSet and Komodo are two here in the US that are doing a pretty solid job of trying to map out that patient journey. I think CareSet is way ahead in the way they do it. They've got some really smart folks there who've been doing this for a long, long time, but it's only one set of data. But it's the data that we need right now because it's Medicare, Medicaid, that
Hmm.
population that the FDA
Yeah.
says we have to have, right?
Yeah. Yeah. True. True.
Yeah.
What's
Otherwise,
the rest of the world then? Because, like, British, I come from Europe,
yeah,
and, like, I also know that after phase one, the likelihood of you having at least one more country in your clinical trial is very, very high, if not 100% of the cases. So, in reality, clinical trials are a global creature. So,
correct.
great that we have solutions in the States, but what happens when you have to go outside of the States? How do you understand the patient journey? And also, is it critical to understand the patient journey?
I think it is to a point. We're running a colon cancer trial at the moment. It's very arduous because you have to be tested for a couple of things. A procedure has to be done, and
Mm,
within 5 days, we have to enroll you in the trial. Otherwise, you're not eligible.
yeah.
So, how do you find that and how do you figure that out? Right? So, claims data will tell you that, but what will really be good is the electronic health record,
Mm,
because in the record, particularly in the US, for example, you have to use ICDs or procedure codes to get billing to get paid. So as soon as we see, what we've done here in the US is we've done exactly that. We've created the triggers in a business rule. And as soon as we see that, we put an ad in front of the doctor that says, hey, there's a trial going on and this patient may be eligible.
Hmm.
It's not global. We can do it in the US. We can't do it anywhere in the world at the moment, but there are possibilities of doing it. And there are three categories. One is the CRO or the PI, and mainly it's the PI because they've got access to the doctors in their system.
Hmm.
The secondly is the doctors themselves and raising awareness of the trial with the doctors. I will submit, there's about 1,000 patient recruitment companies out there. They can raise awareness with the patient, but the doctor really, at the end of the day, decides, right? So you've got to get to that doctor for this colon cancer trial, for example.
Yeah.
We've got to get to that doctor and educate them that if you have this patient and you've done this, and in the next 5 days you're going to operate on them, don't put them in this trial first.
Mm.
How do
Yeah.
you communicate that, right? So that's the real world. How do you use the data side of things? And I think we leave it too much to the PI. There is ways to get the data to do it. In the UK, there's a few trusts now coming together to to create that model for you to do that. Germany, there's a company called Informatica that allows you to
Yeah.
engage on their platform, right? Et cetera, et cetera. I talked to your friend Blas yesterday.
Yes.
There's a capability on his app that can do that. So there are pieces in Europe that's starting to emerge, I think. US, we can
Very
do it really
positive.
well now. Yeah.
That's very positive, actually.
Yeah.
With this one last question, where do you see real world data in 5 years from now, 10 years from now?
Gosh. If I could answer that, I'd be sitting on a beach in Jamaica running my own bar.
So maybe we
Uh,
should try.
yeah. I am not one of those futurists. In all honesty, I think maybe the next 24 months at the most, because the world of tech, I've learned very early on, the world of technology changes so fast, right?
Oh,
I
yeah.
was a, I was a Lotus Notes evangelist for about 2 years until Microsoft came around, right? So things change very, very quickly. So I do 2 year horizons at the most. So I'd say in the next 2 years, I think the advent of large language models and AI, and particularly generative, is going to change how we think about this data. People, um, people like there's a company called Box here in the US, right? They're coming into Europe now. These guys are thinking about how can they enable you or a CRO or a biotech or a pharma company to pull data in one place from a number of open APIs. I think they have like, I don't know, 30 or 40 open APIs. They can get data from any CTMS, any EDM, so put it together in one place. So I think over the next 2 years, you're going to see an explosion of people like Box and other companies that are not in the clinical business coming into this and saying, we have a capability for you to put it all together in one place. You don't, as a CRO, have to go to 6 portals for 6 different sponsors with 5 different CTMSs, right?
Mhm.
It doesn't matter what portal you use, put it all in one place. I think that will happen. And the second thing that will happen is the academic centers. I've seen 9 of them get together in Europe. There's about 20 here in the US coming together and sharing data from the EHRs, de-identified, to then apply Gen AI to it for things like research. You're seeing it in genomics at the moment, right?
Yeah.
All the genomics companies. Now you have access to any tissue sample from anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world, right? Those academic centers are opening up their tissue banks. So I think that's what's going to happen in the next 24 months is people like as a Box or somebody we've never heard of in healthcare saying, I've got this thing. I can help you in healthcare do it, put it in one place, and then manage it.
Hmm. Can I add like a third suggestion here?
Sure.
I think also digital biomarkers may also change the game slightly.
Oh, yeah, 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 for sure. Digital biomarkers. And I think more and more, I'm already seeing it, digital twins
Yeah.
for early stage, particularly phase one. For early stage, phase one, the
Mhm.
digital twin business is going to explode in the next 2 years for sure.
Well, exciting. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts, Ritesh. Thank you also for um, this like driving this collaboration and like putting all these different parties together, you're kind of like doing the same thing like Box is doing, but actually for different partners.
Yep.
So
Yep. Firmly
it's
believe in the collaboration. We in healthcare need to forget. I think pharma particularly, whenever they come into a meeting, the first thing they think about is who's going to own the IP and how do I protect myself. And they
mm,
need to start thinking about how do we collaborate to make sure we're raising all boats and we're doing this for the good of humankind. There
yeah.
you are.
If not for the humankind, for the good of the industry, at least,
There you go.
because
I'm the one.
that's a good start.
Exactly right.
Great, Ritesh. Well, thank you so much for this conclusion. I agree with you. Collaboration is more what like win-win mentality. Collaboration is what we need, and it's great that we have leaders like you to actually drive this forward.
Maya, thank you for the opportunity. Appreciate it.